She showed up at 2:14 in the morning the same way she always showed up. Quietly, without announcement, already thinking 3 steps ahead of whatever was about to go wrong. Dr. Maya Reyes walked through the ambulance bay doors and felt the familiar cold of the hospital air settle against her skin. The trauma bay was calm. Not the good kind of calm. The kind that sits right before something breaks. She had worked long enough in emergency medicine to tell the difference. Her scrubs were faded navy blue, washed so many times the fabric had gone soft. There was a small bleach stain on the left sleeve that she had stopped noticing years ago. She wore no jewelry, no watch with a decorative face, just a simple black band around her wrist that nurses sometimes asked about and she never explained. She picked up the first chart on the board and got to work. The ER at this hour was a quiet kind of busy. A man with a broken wrist in Bay 2, a teenager with appendicitis being prepped for surgery, an elderly woman who had fallen getting up for water and was embarrassed about it, in a way that made Maya sit with her an extra few minutes, just talking, just being present, because sometimes that is what medicine actually requires. Her charge nurse, a steady woman named Dolores who had worked nights for 11 years, handed her a coffee without being asked. "You eat anything tonight?" Dolores said. "I had something," Maya said. That's not an answer. It wasn't meant to be. Dolores gave her the look she reserved for difficult patients, and difficult doctors equally, then went back to her station. Maya drank the coffee and moved to Bay 3. This was her life. This was what she had built. 4 years as a trauma attending at this hospital, seeing the worst things people could do to each other, and the worst things that could simply happen to a body without any human help at all. She was good at it. Calm under pressure in a way that residents mistook for coldness, until the moment they watched her save someone they had already given up on, and then they understood it was something else entirely. She did not talk about herself, not because she was secretive exactly, more because she had learned, a long time ago, that most people could not hold what she would have to say, and the energy required to translate her own history into something acceptable for polite conversation was energy she preferred to spend elsewhere. The cardiologist on call, Dr. Stein, found her at the coffee station at 2:30 and said something about the weather. She responded appropriately. They were colleagues in the comfortable, distant way of people who respected each other without knowing each other. At 2:31 in the morning, her pager went off. She read the message once, read it again. Multiple casualties incoming, training incident, Coronado, 6 total, 1 critical. She set down the coffee cup carefully and walked to the trauma bay. They arrived 4 minutes later. The ambulance doors opened, and the night air came through cold and sharp. And then there were men filling the bay. 6 of them, as promised. Large and quiet in the specific way of people who have been trained to occupy space without wasting it. They moved with the coordinated, unhurried calm of people who had been in worse situations than this one, and had learned not to spend panic on anything they could still manage. 4 of them were walking wounded. She made the assessment instantly, the way she always did. Cuts, abrasions, one man cradling his left arm with the particular stillness that meant fracture, another with a gash along his jaw that had been field-dressed with something that was not technically medical gauze, but had done the job. The 5th man was on a stretcher. His name, she would learn in the next 30 seconds, was Master Chief Garrett Foley. He was 51 years old, built like someone who had spent decades insisting on it, and he was bleeding from a wound in his upper thigh that had been properly tourniqueted, correctly applied, correct position. Someone on that team knew what they were doing, but the blood loss was significant, and his blood pressure was dropping in a way she did not like. She was already moving toward him, when the 6th man stepped in front of her. He was tall. He wore civilian clothes that fit the way military men wear civilian clothes. Technically correct, somehow unconvincing. His jaw was the kind of jaw that seemed designed for a recruiting poster. He looked past her and said, "I need to speak to the attending physician." She stopped, looked at him. "I need to speak to whoever is running this trauma bay," he said, still scanning over her shoulder. Behind her, she heard Dolores make a small sound, the sound Dolores made when she was deciding whether or not to intervene. Dr. Stein, who had followed the commotion down from cardiology out of curiosity, cleared his throat gently. "That would be Dr. Reyes," he said. "Right in front of you." The man, Lieutenant Commander Price, she would learn, the team's officer in charge, looked at her, did the math. The math clearly did not compute on the first pass. She did not wait for the second pass. Foley's femoral region, she said, already moving around him. Tell me his last systolic reading. Price told her. She wrote it down without looking up from the chart she had already opened. How long ago was the tourniquet applied? 18 minutes. Correct application? Yes. Who applied it? A pause. He did, himself. She glanced up from the chart then, just briefly. That told her something about Garrett Foley before she had exchanged a single word with him. A man applying his own tourniquet correctly while going into shock was a man with a very specific kind of training and a very specific kind of will. OR is on hold, she said to Dolores. Get me a type and cross, 2 large-bore IVs, and call vascular surgery. She was already at the stretcher, already looking at Foley's face, which was pale and damp, and remarkably composed for a man losing blood at this rate. You're going to be okay, she said to him, not gently, just factually, the way you state a thing you are intending to make true. He looked at her with eyes that were still sharp despite everything. Don't make promises, he said. I don't, she said. That was information. Then they took him to surgery, and she turned to the 4 remaining men. The next 2 hours were procedure and focus, and the quiet satisfaction of work that requires everything you have. She cleaned and closed the gash on the jaw. 14 stitches, clean lines, the kind of closure that would leave almost no scar. She confirmed the fracture, splinted it, ordered imaging. She debrided a burn on the forearm of a man who said nothing while she worked, who simply sat and breathed steadily and watched her hands with the expression of someone grading a performance. The man with the split knuckles, Senior Chief Vargas, a broad, dark-eyed man whose hands looked like they had been through more than one disagreement with hard surfaces, refused anesthesia with the cheerful stubbornness of someone who had made this particular mistake before and was committed to making it again. It'll take 2 minutes, she said. I'm good, he said. You'll feel everything. I've felt everything before. She looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said, and she closed his knuckles without anesthetic, and he sat completely still and breathed through his nose and didn't make a sound. And when she was done, she said, Nice work. And he said, You too. And it was the most straightforward exchange she had in the entire night. Somewhere in the middle of closing Vargas's hand, he said, Where'd you learn to close like that? She tied off a stitch. Practice. He nodded slowly. That was an answer he recognized. He didn't ask a follow-up question. That told her something about him too. The team settled into the waiting area in the way that military people settle into waiting. Not restless, not anxious, simply present, stationary. She passed them several times over the next hour and felt, each time, the particular quality of attention they were paying her. Not rude, not obvious, just the careful, quiet observation of people whose professional survival has always depended on accurate assessment. She was used to being underestimated, had made a kind of peace with it, or at least a kind of strategic use of it. What she was not used to was being watched, the way these men were watching her, as though they were solving something, as though she were a question they were working backward from. At 4:50 in the morning, the recovery nurse called her. Foley was awake. She walked into the recovery room with his post-op chart and did what she always did, checked his vitals, checked his color, checked his eyes. His pressure was stable, his color was coming back. The surgery had gone cleanly. The vascular team had repaired the damage, and the attending had called it textbook, which in surgical terms is the highest possible compliment. Foley was watching her before she reached his bed. She ran through the post-op check, listened to his chest, noted his responses. He was alert, which was good. He was obviously in pain and was not mentioning it, which was predictable. Then he said her name. Not doctor, not hey, her name, her last name, the way her old teammates used to say it, flat, certain, with no question mark attached. Reyes. She stopped writing. She did not look up immediately. There was a half-second in which she made a choice about her face. A habit so old, she no longer thought of it as a choice. And then she looked up. He was watching her with eyes that had been doing the same math as Price, but for much longer, and had arrived somewhere entirely different. What squadron? he said. Again, no question mark. He already knew. He was giving her the chance to say it herself. She looked at him for a long moment. He waited. He was very good at waiting. She said nothing. Price came in then, which she had been half expecting. Vargas behind him. Then two others. They filled the doorway and the space around it, not crowding, simply present in that deliberate way she recognized from a decade that she had packed away very carefully and stored somewhere she did not often visit. Price looked at her differently now. The math had resolved. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the small recalibration happening behind his eyes. Our medical liaison flagged your NPI number, he said. His voice was careful, respectful, in the way of a man who has just realized he needs to revise something. CENTCOM ran it against service records. She set down the chart, folded her hands, waited. Your ghost, he said. The room was quiet. Her call sign. 8 years ago, a designation given to her by a team she had deployed with 3 times, on operations she had never described to anyone at this hospital, in places that did not appear on her curriculum vitae. Ghost, because she moved through environments without disturbing them, because she appeared and disappeared, and left outcomes behind her, without leaving a trace of herself. She had not heard that name in 4 years. From the bed, quietly, Foley said, "Told you." She looked at him. "I knew in the bay," he said. "The way you moved to the stretcher. The tourniquet assessment. You didn't ask what it was, you asked who applied it. That's a field question, not a hospital question." He paused to breathe, which cost him slightly. "I've seen 2 people close a wound like you closed Vargas's hand. Both of them were operators." She picked up the chart again, noted his pain level, which she suspected he was underreporting, made a note to adjust his medication. "Your secret is safe," Vargas said from the doorway, his bandaged hand at his side. "We're not here to make things complicated." She looked at him. "Nothing is complicated," she said. He smiled at that, just slightly. "No, I guess not." Price cleared his throat. He was a man clearly accustomed to being the most informed person in any room, and this morning he had arrived as the least informed person in this particular room, and he had the dignity to understand that, and to sit with it, without making it someone else's problem. She respected that. "For what it's worth," he said, "Foley's alive because of you. We're aware of what that means. He's alive because someone on your team applied a tourniquet correctly under pressure," she said. "And because the vascular surgeon on call tonight is excellent, and because the OR was ready in under 4 minutes. I was part of it, not all of it." Price nodded. He looked like he wanted to say several more things. He chose not to. That too, she respected. She finished the post-op chart. She gave the recovery nurse Foley's instructions and adjusted his pain medication and told him he would be transferred to a room in the morning and that he should sleep if he could and eat something when they brought it, even if he didn't want to. "You're good at this," Foley said as she turned to leave. She paused. "At medicine," he said. Then, after a moment, "At this too, the other thing." She thought about that for a second. About what it meant that he had said both things separately, that he understood they were not the same thing, that one did not explain the other, that she had built 2 complete serious lives in 50 years, and both of them were real, and neither one canceled out the other. "Get some sleep, Master Chief," she said. She walked out of the recovery room and down the hallway and pushed through the door to the stairwell, where it was cold and quiet, and the fluorescent light was the particular flickering white of 4 in the morning. She leaned against the wall, stood there. She did not feel exposed, exactly. She felt seen, which was different. She had spent 4 years in this hospital being not quite visible in a specific way that she had chosen and maintained. And tonight, 6 men had walked through the ambulance doors, and one of them had known her name before she told him, and now all 6 of them knew something that her charge nurse did not know, that her department head did not know, that almost nobody in her current life knew. She stood in the stairwell for 4 minutes. Then she went back in. There were still patients. There were always still patients. A college student with a dislocated shoulder arrived at 5:20. A kitchen fire brought in a man with second-degree burns at 5:38. The board filled and emptied, and filled again, the way it always did, indifferent to everything that had happened in the night, asking only that she show up and do the work. She showed up, she did the work. By the time the morning shift arrived and she handed off her last chart, the sun was coming through the ambulance bay doors in thin, flat lines across the floor. She stood in it for a moment, let it be warm. Then she walked to her car, drove home, and slept without dreaming.